Hi everyone, welcome to Cambridge Creatives Q&A with Duki Dror. I'm Hannah.
Hi, I'm Fabs. We are the co-presidents of Cambridge Creatives. We are a student-run creative collective. We're curating a series of talks with world-renowned TV professionals, film professionals and theatre professionals. So please follow our Facebook page to find out more about future events. Just a few housekeeping rules before we begin. If you have any questions for our guest speaker, please type them in the Q&A box below and we will read them out for you. Bear with us if there are any technical difficulties and let us know if there are any problems with hearing or seeing us. Enjoy the Q&A.
So here is a little intro about Duki. He is a prolific documentary filmmaker, most known for his hit Netflix series Inside The Mossad. His films such as Mendelsohn's Incessant Visions and Raging Dove have won numerous awards on the film festival circuit. His films focus on issues of migration, identity and displacement. We are honoured to have this intrepid filmmaker speak. So my first question for you, Duki, is when did you know that you wanted to work in film or documentaries?
Wow. Well, there are two questions. When did I understand that I want to do films? Well, it was, I think, I was a soldier in the Israeli army in the combat unit. And then at some point because I had photography education in high school, they assigned me to do films, like documentary films for the army. And I really loved it. And I thought this is something I can do very well. And I understand the way of the visual storytelling. And that's what, when as soon as I finished my army service, I decided to go and apply to film schools in the United States, where I studied there. But I didn't want to do documentaries. All I thought was to make feature films. And that's what really I was aiming to, writing drama and making drama, dramatic films, scripted films. And just at the end of my school, just before I graduated, I took this class where I had to make a documentary, a short documentary. And so I started to do that. And I was looking for a subject, what to do about, and I found this story about inmates lifers, inmates that are for life in prison in Chicago, and they started a program, then inmates, to teach illiterate inmates, incoming inmates, how to read and write. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. Maybe I'll make a short film about that. I went to the prison. I met some of the people. I started to film them, the inmates. And it was a sensation feeling of being able to talk to people that I would never speak before to, people who committed heinous crimes, for instance. But I was there and I was interviewing them, understanding what's going on in their mind, how do they see things. And it was a feeling that I wanted to keep, and I kept going with this. I finished this film. It was a 1-hour film. Although it was a student film, it was very successful. It went to film festivals at that time, and on PBS, the US documentary public television. So that's how I started.
Wow, very cool. So how did your sort of background in like writing and feature films prepare you for documentary making?
Well, I don't know if it prepared me. I think I always tried to understand stories and you understand. And one of the things I went to school to learn after my first year in studying film, I felt that I don't have the enough background of knowledge to understand the dramatic tools, to understand the drama. So I went to study theater and classical studies to understand really the beginning of how do you create a story, how the Greeks made their drama, wrote their dramas, what's the meaning of stories, how they evolve, how do you tell a story, and that was something that's still going on when I'm making documentaries. This background, studies. These studies are really helping me to understand documentary situations, real life situations, also as stories, because you have to bring it to the audience, to the people who will watch your film at the end as a story. So I see documentary as storytelling.
That's really interesting. You've both directed and produced. Could you tell us more about how you see the differences between the roles, and do you have a role that you prefer?
Well, in documentary, because it's a low budget usually production, unlike feature films, cinematic films, then you need to, you can really do more than one role, more than the role of director, and yet usually it's really helps because you need to save money. So and if you do know how to produce, if you know how to do these two roles, then you're in advantage, actually. I always tell my film students when I teach, I tell them that really my most important class was with a teacher that I admired. His name is Peter Thompson. And he was like a really incredible filmmaker. He's doing these strange, very artistic films. But the first class he had with us, he told us, okay, I will teach you how to use spreadsheet, Excel, how to write, how to make a budget, a film budget. And that was the most important lesson I had in film school, because after that, it was the first time I realized that I have to do something like that too, because this is part of filmmaking, the business. How do you build a business around a film production? And I enjoy that very much. I enjoyed very much to be in this role of a producer. And there's a conflict many times between these two roles, the producer and director. The director wants to go and do more shootings, and this is not enough. And the producer say, oh, we don't have enough budget, we have to cut it and finish now. And these things I do sometimes have to they have this two voices in my head saying this or that, but always the director wins in these situations.
Aside from the advice from your teacher, what was the best advice someone has given you regarding a project or approaching a project?
I think it was the same Peter Thompson who said, go with the content, and the style will come after that naturally. And I keep that also as a rule for myself, because many times you watch a film and you say, oh wow, this is a great storytelling, this is a great style, and you want to go ahead and do something similar, or maybe just to take off from this, and maybe I would not say imitate, but to do a takeoff of something like that. And I think this is when it's better to understand first what is your content, what is the story about, understanding very well, and then the part of how it will evolve, the cinematic look, the style will come from that. So this is a very important rule that I learned.
Some of the content of your films is incredibly personal and sensitive. Your film, My Fantasia, deals with very personal history about your family. For those who haven't watched it, could you tell us a bit about your past and your family history and your parents' emigration?
Well, yes. My parents were born in Iraq. My mom came in when she was 12. It was 1951. The Iraqi government were expelled Jews from Iraq. They wanted to go and be in Israel, and they left. My father was in the underground in Iraq, and he was arrested when he was very young, 16, and had to spend 5 years in the Iraqi prison before he came to Israel. And you know, this is something that this story my father never talked about, but it was always in the background somehow. It was always part of my life. And after I finished my studies, then I wanted to go ahead and do this. It's the personal film about your father. There's a joke in the film schools that you have to make a film about your father or your mother before you graduate. So I started this film when I was still a student, or just before I finished, and it continued a few years after I graduated. And it was also in a time when I was very influenced by first-person documentaries. It was very common in the United States to make first-person documentaries. And so, yeah, that was one of my films, early films.
What was the response like? How did it feel to release such a personal film? Did your family support it?
Well, it was I don't know. It was of course very, very personal, and my family. My father was very afraid. Oh wow, I will be on TV. I'm going to be screened. I don't want it to happen. But there was people were anxious, and there were some of my family members were not very happy about it. But eventually everybody was okay and happy, and became like, oh wow. They know us now when we go to the market, so it was funny.
A lot of your films focus on subjects that other people run away from. Why are you drawn to such projects, and what gives you confidence to pursue subjects that other people won't?
I don't know. Is it true? These are the subjects I'm working on. I'm always looking for something that was never done, or some story that nobody will pick up, and characters that somehow history passed them by, and they don't exist. So, so I'm always very interested in these type of characters, and to find them or to bring their story out. Yeah, well, some even the Mossad people, the Mossad agents, they are not really characters that were did interviews or doing interviews. They are hidden. So it was a hidden story that had to, like a hidden treasure, to bring out and expose in some ways. So that's what my role as a documentary filmmaker. I feel this is to bring out these stories, because we always, you know, the stories that we hear are many times stories of that we hear again and again through the other media, like news, and we have like amplification of stories of that we know, but sometimes there are these hidden treasures that always nice to find.
How did you find out about the story that inspired Raging Dove? Was that another one of those hidden treasures?
Yeah, it was. It was. I read a small article in the local news. It says it was like a small article with one paragraph, and it said Johar Abulashin was a world champion in, I don't remember the year, and then he waved the Israeli flag. And after that, he lost, because the boxing association didn't like this, and ESPN didn't like this, so they didn't give him another chance, and he lost his title. And then a few years later, he had another chance to win again his belt, and he waved the Palestinian flag. And then the other side didn't like this and cut him off. And now he's coming to Israel and Palestine. He wants to make a world championship bout, one in Nazareth, where he was born, and one in Gaza. And it was only one paragraph. It takes me time to explain it, but he is this Israeli-Palestinian Arab, but Israeli citizen, who has this complex of identity, and he's trying to struggle with it in the ring, when he already became like a world champion. But he wants now to be accepted and make something for the Israelis and for the Palestinians. He feels that one part is here and one part of him is here. And yes, it was absolutely something that I would run for it and do it. So that's what I did, and followed him through his painful journey, I would say, to do it.
That's really, really interesting. We were wondering, which has been the most challenging documentary for you to make, either in terms of the content or the restrictions?
It's always my next documentary, which will be the most difficult and hardest. And yeah, but each one, each documentary, you have a different restrictions, different ethical questions, different approach, different how to tell the story. So it's hard to nail it to one. Well, each one was really difficult. So but it was, you know, it's like a probe that you have to break to solve, and then it takes time, and then you solve it. Yeah? And you know, sometimes there are restrictions. Yes, there are restrictions that you cannot really do everything in a shoot. Sometimes a character decides that he or she doesn't want to continue, and even though you have really great material and very strong scenes that can be extremely powerful for a documentary or for the story, then the character doesn't want you to use this, and then what do? And these kind of difficulties happen to me too.
So you spoke about people not wanting to be on tape. Can you give us an example of people that don't want you to delete footage or don't want to be on camera?
Well, I had a film that I was a producer of, and the director, actually, it's called Seekers, and it was a personal story of the director who who was like this freestyle, free person going to Goa and smoking joints and being like to all the parties, and slowly he became a religious person, and everything changed about him. But it took some time, and before the last part of this reborn process. He told me, listen, I documented all my life when I was 20s, 30s, and now, you know, I want to make a film, and let's edit this and make. I think it's can be a good way of me saying goodbye to my life before. And I looked at the material. It was just amazing, amazing footage of a person becoming an adult and leaving all the understanding that life is not a game. And but there were some really harsh scenes there. And just before the film was released, he tried to, you know, he was like saying, okay, maybe we should not take this film out. Let's just bury it. I don't know. I don't feel like I should release it now. I'm a religious person. I think what's in it, all these terrible things that I said in the beginning, 10 years ago, when I was taking dope and drinking too much, I think I cannot really screen it anymore now. So it was a big dilemma what to do with this. This is one story, but the film came out at the end.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
How do you personally cope with the information and the struggles that you uncovered during your documentaries? So one of your films, Across the River, covers the HIV/AIDS crisis in the Ethiopian Jewish community. How do you sort of like distance yourself from the sort of problems and difficulties that your interviewees are going through?
I don't know. It's not like I don't feel like a journalist going into the wilderness and shooting and coming and then bringing all this material. And I feel when I'm in these difficult situations and really bad. You're talking about Across the River. We shot in Ethiopia when it was infested with HIV. It was really hard to watch people in the countryside that were just dying in front of your eyes. And I don't know, I feel that when I'm with a camera or doing my job, I feel this is my duty to document what I'm seeing, to be there and to understand and try to understand what I see and bring it out in a way that people will understand and contextualize it, give it the context of not just throw on people footage and say, oh, this is really bad what's going on there, but really to give a context to each image that I'm bringing. So I'm so invested in what I'm doing. Sometimes it feels like, you know, I'm in it, but I'm not in it. I'm there, but I'm really focused. So I guess that's how I manage.
How do you avoid making the lives of your interviewees into a kind of show and retain their integrity?
Oh, I'm really, I hope I'm not doing a show out of my characters. I'm trying not to. But it always starts with really an agreement, sort of, not an agreement like a paper agreement, but you know, there's kind of a mutual I forgot the name, the word in English.
Like respect?
Respect? Yeah, respect and you know, I'm telling the character, okay, we're going on a journey, and this journey we don't know where it will take us, but let's have this trust that we are going together. I respect you in the utmost way, but we have to go and bring out a true story out of it. It doesn't have to be sensationalist, but I really want to understand the world, your story through your eyes. So that's the agreement. It's the trust.
What do you think the boundary is between journalism and entertainment in documentaries?
Well, I think it's both. It's both. I mean, storytelling in a way, of course, it's entertainment, but it's also reading a book is entertainment. You know, reading even, you know, Philip Roth is entertainment, but it's more than entertainment. It you know, brings you to a higher understanding of life, and that's what I feel that documentary must do too. It's not like give you the information or entertain you. All these are in it. Also, journalism is in it, because you do, in a way, a journalistic way. Not everything, you know, but you do some journalistic way. For instance, the Mossad is also journalistic. It's not like only documentary, and it has both entertainment parts, I guess, when, you know, some of the interviews are getting into some humor there, black humor even, and but so it's a combination of things, of elements.
Do you you spoke about finding the article about the boxer in a newspaper. Do you sometimes find yourself, when you go into a room of people, hearing a story and thinking, "Ooh, maybe I'll use that for a documentary"?
Yes, sometimes it happens sometimes, and it happens also. For instance, in you know, in front of a breakfast table, and my wife, you know, when my kids were smaller and we were thinking, okay, maybe we should let them go to school alone, not to escort them. And it wasn't easy to think about just letting your kids go alone. And my wife said, oh, what do you think about, maybe we should make a film about kids going to school, their way to school. And I said, wow, that's a great idea, let's do that. So something can happen from that. And then we followed 7 kids in their way from school and back from school, from home to school and from school to home, when they're not escorted, and see what happened to them in this way. And so you get your ideas from many things that can, coming at you.
Where did the idea come from for Inside the Mossad, and how difficult was it to get it off the ground and develop it?
Inside the Mossad was, it started from a different project I was involved in, and when I finished an interview with this 80-year-old guy, I met him in a funeral of my uncle, and I was surprised to see him. I didn't know that he's a friend of my uncle. And when we were waiting to the funeral, he took me to the side, and he then started to tell me a story, a long story. It was like 15-20 minutes of telling me how he was an agent of Mossad in the late 40s, and how he brought a really important message that was extremely important and before the war of 1948. And I was waiting for the funeral, and I hear this story about the guy who saved the state of Israel from extension, and I said, wow, really? People like that are living around us who maybe did these really heroic things, and who are part of our history, and I don't know, nobody knows about them. Maybe I should look around and see if I can find these kinds of people. So that's how it started, and it took a long time to make, to start to find the people and to get them to speak in front of the camera. It took a year and a half, to start to find somebody, and then this somebody will bring you to another one. But the main thing was to build a trust with people, and that's how network of the interviewees began.
It's so impressive. Were there any conditions that some of them set down to either refuse to say anything, or things that they wanted cut out of the documentary?
Yes, there were some. There was some stuff that they were not. They said, "Oh, okay, I'm not going to speak about this. No, don't ask me. And some that I was required to take out of the series. Yeah.
Did you have any sort of memorable moments when filming, where things were revealed, or what stood out to you?
The Mossad, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, there were, it mostly was confessions of Mossad agents. So each interview like that, it was like a check game. How do you play check with a guy who can be outsmart you, because he's very smart and very manipulative, and they can really x-ray you and understand how and what you will ask, and they will. So it was like each interview was a check game. In the beginning, I was really I was kind of I was taken off from this. I was saying, oh, I don't know how I'm going to do this because this is like a struggle. But after, I think, the second interview, so the first interview, I felt that this was really the worst interview I had in my life, because the interviewee always was condescending and trying to outsmart me. And I was really pissed. And my producer and cameraman, after this interview, said, "Oh, this was great. It's going to be a great interview." And I didn't know what they're talking about. After I watched it, I said, "Oh yeah, that's great," because they are exposing themselves. They are exposing the way that they are manipulating people, and the camera is there, and it records everything. So I can work with this. I have this weapon with me, the camera, that helps me to do this, to do these interviews. And I started to have fun with this, to do these interviews. The next interviews was really great to do.
Have your perceptions about the Mossad changed after having made this series?
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, I didn't know much about Mossad. And suddenly, after I did this four-part series, I spoke with so many people. So of course, I know much more about Mossad. I probably don't know much important stuff about Mossad, but I know enough that when one of my interviewees, Rafi Eitan, died, it was about a year and a half ago. The BBC called me in the morning and said, "Oh, we want to talk with you because you know about Mossad and you know about these people, so let's talk about Rafi Eitan." But, well, my perception is that, I didn't change much. It didn't change much because I didn't know much about Mossad. I think that I was impressed by the level of people who are there, the guts they have, and well, also actually the openness. At the end of the day, they were open to speak with me, to talk about things, and that was a surprise, I would say.
Mm.
Yeah.
Who has been your favourite person to interview throughout the years? Hannah told me that in the production of your upcoming documentary, you managed to interview a former foreign minister and prime minister. Were they amongst your favourites?
No, actually not. I much rather interview simple people who are not really in the spotlights. So, although I like to interview the prime minister, of course, it's good always but I enjoyed, I think, one of the my favorite interviewees is one of the Mossad agents that I interviewed, and I liked it very much because he's a storyteller, and the way he spoke and the way he talked about how he looks at things, how when he spoke about his experiences, he spoke like a writer. He spoke like somebody who would write this in a book. So it was like speaking to John le Carré. It was like not just a spook, not just a heinous agent, but also a storyteller, and I loved it very much. It was great.
Did you find often when you were speaking to them that they actually enjoyed opening up, and that now that they've been given the opportunity, they really flourished with that?
Yes, because yeah, they're because they are storytellers, and you know, but they cannot really speak. So they are silent storytellers. And but the moment they felt trust, and the moment they felt that they can, somebody really relates to how they talk, how they explain, how they tell the story, then they open up. Yes.
Yeah, I've just got one more question on that as well, because I
Yeah.
found it really interesting. You sort of, when you're doing the documentary, you use language like hits. And did you find yourself using terminology that they used and familiarizing yourself with that in order to understand them properly?
Well, not that much. I mean, of course, I read like 5, 6 books about Mossad before, and tried to, and I read some of John Le Carre's books, but I always come to my interviewees as somebody who don't know enough. And so they actually, as an interviewers, rather being interviewed by people who don't know enough. And I didn't have any problem of asking, what do you mean by that? Because I don't understand this term. And it was good because most of my viewers don't know either. They know less than me. So they have to explain it to me, so also the audience understands.
That's really interesting. Soon we will have some questions from the audience. So please keep typing the questions into the Q&A and we will read them out. And while we are waiting, we will ask our final question.
Do you have any TV or film recommendations to fill our lockdown?
Sure, many. Well, but you probably watch many of them. I love TV dramas. I love mostly TV dramas. I don't know if you watch Babylon Berlin. It's a German drama. It's great drama. I think it's on Netflix. There's another, wait, I'll let you know. Just a minute. Yeah. I know this much is true. Do you know this? It's a new drama by HBO. Little Big Lies. Yeah, of course. There are some documentaries you should watch. One of them is Icarus. It's a story about, you know that?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Okay.
Is it also on Netflix?
Yeah, it's also on Netflix. The Devil Next Door. It's a very nice, good documentary series on Netflix. It's about the trial of a Nazi death camp guard. Little Dieter Needs to Fly. I don't know where you can watch it, but this is a great film by German director Werner Herzog. Little Dieter Needs to Fly. You have to watch it. And Don't Fuck with Cats, of course. You watched it probably. And yeah.
Amazing. Thank you.
Really good suggestions. First question from our audience is, what would you say are the most important elements to making a really good documentary?
Follow your bliss. Just feel that you are. There's one very important rule that I'm telling my students. When you're making a film, don't ever think about the moment that you'll get the trophy. Don't think about that. You just have to think about making a great film, not about the prize that you win at the end. So this is important rule.
What topics are you interested in exploring next, and what projects do you have coming up?
Well, I'm working on a film about narco-terrorism. We shot it in South America, about the connection between terror and drugs and money laundering. And this is sort of a journalistic project. And also I'm working now I'm developing with Galia, with my wife, a TV drama around people in confinement that have leper disease. And it's a period piece that happens in the between World War I and World War II in Jerusalem. There's like this house that holds the people there, the patients. So I think it started when we were in confinement with the corona, and I said, oh, wait, let's write something about people in confinement and people who have disease. So it's in development.
We've got a question from Emil saying, what advice would you give to a young filmmaker trying to break into the industry?
Just make, you have to enjoy it first. You have to really enjoy what you do and be persistent. And it's a long journey to make films. You have to be persistent. You have to all the time think about how you make a better film, how you do it better. Even I'm today, after 30 films that I made, I always see that my last film is not as good, and I have to make a better one, next one. So it's something that keeps you going, and it will happen. Getting into the industry will happen when you're good, when you know how to tell a story. Because storytellers, especially now, documentary storytellers, is a good commodity. Because people less and less read books, so the form of storytelling is going to films, and that's where you have to work yourself in.
Given the political unrest in Israel, do you ever feel a responsibility as a documentary maker, to document and record the stories currently in Israel?
You mean, I didn't get the beginning of your questions?
They said given the political unrest in upheaval.
Well, it's yes, but it's too close it's too close. It's here. It happens now, and I don't like to deal with current events. I'd rather see things from perspective and understand it from perspective. So it's hard for me to deal with something that happens now. Maybe in 3 years, 2 years, 5 years, then it'll be a good time to reflect on what is going on now.
We've got a bit more of a technical question from someone. They want to know, you said the style follows the content. They're wondering what stage that the style comes in. When do you start thinking about that? Or is that something that you just constantly bear in mind, sort of content, and then after that you'll recognize that a style will come?
That's a good question. And every time it happens in a different time. So I can tell you that with Mossad, we had, I did all these interviews, and we edit the episodes with the interviews. We had nothing in between, just interviews and archive. And I was thinking, what should I do? How do I bring out a visual, a style into that? And I was, just walking and thinking and just, it dawned at me, and I said, okay, let's take the camera to the beach and see what I can find. And I started to do tests, and suddenly something happened. I felt this is the way to explore the visual style of the series. So it's just intuitive, I guess.
We have a question from someone who's based in Tel Aviv but went to Cambridge. They asked if Do you have any advice about the film industry in the UK or the US, and what would be the best way to make the move professionally?
To move to the US or to UK or vice
Or,
versa?
I guess which is the best place to work in
Well, it's, the place you work in is the best place is where you feel more interested in, where you feel this is the stories that you want to tell, and that's that's what you want to explore. So there's no one place, I guess. Any place that you feel this is where your story is.
What topics are you interested in exploring next? Is there something that you've always wanted to do but haven't been able to get the right material or get the right people in to interview?
Again, I think ideas are coming and going, and sometimes it sticks and sometimes it doesn't. And I hear stories many times, the last few years, people are approaching me and telling me, oh, listen, this is a great story. Why don't you do this? I have a great story. I have a great story. Many people really want to tell their stories. Most of the time I listen, yes, but most of the time I just don't have either time or I don't feel this is the type of story that I want to explore. Sometimes, I'm interested in stories that I work with production companies around the world. And for instance, I have a German partner, and the German partner is developing a story in Germany that has a connection that I can, Israeli connection, and then if the story really appeals to me, then I join and we work together. I think this is something that I didn't mention, that filmmaking is all about working together, teamwork and team. How you create the team of people, creative people to work with you, and this is super important to have that to be really successful. So you cannot really do a film by your own. You have to have the creativeness of people that will be part of your vision or part of your story or part of what you had in mind, and work with you and develop their creativity into it. And you have to give a lot of freedom to creative people to work in it. And then you have a great you have a great result. So you have to learn how to do that. It took me time to learn, because I was always, in the beginning, I wanted to control everything and be on my own and do sometimes to film, sometimes to shoot, sometimes to edit. Today, I'm just trying to work with many people, and not that many, but people that I trust and that are very creative, and they are part of the film, part of the work.
Do you ever feel that people expect you to document Jewish or Israeli subjects? And do you feel like this puts you in a box and frustrates you?
No. I feel that this is what interests me. This is me, and and I think that there's a lot of interest in that. And it doesn't put me in a box, really. This is what I really like to do. And sometimes I don't do, only this. I feel that I can do other things. And if I do other things, it's fine. I did a film called Down the Deep Dark Web. It was about the darknet, the deep web. And and it had nothing to do with Jewishness, Israeliness, or whatever. But we are a global society, and we think, we have the same, very similar challenges that we are facing. Either we're in London or Tel Aviv or Bangkok or LA. And documentary is a tool to explore these challenges. So it's and if it's in the web, it's very easy to do. So it was actually it was a film that was spread all over the internet and the dark net and everywhere. So you can watch it online, I think.
What do you think makes a documentary reach an audience and a widespread audience? And what qualities would you say make a documentary reach a widespread audience?
I think that what makes documentary reach an audience is something like Netflix. When you have a film on Netflix, then everybody watches it. You have a spread, such an amazing viewership, such a big audience you have, and so in such a variety that it goes everywhere. But really, what you need is a good subject, a relevant subject, and a good storytelling and good character, of course. I mean, sometimes you just need a really a very eccentric, super eccentric story, a super eccentric character to bring an audience. Yeah, like Tiger King, if you watched it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Your ideas for documentaries come from such diverse sources. Does this ever make it challenging to find funding?
Always, it's a difficult way to how to bring funds and to fund your films. It's always a struggle, and it's less than a struggle now, but for me, than it used to be. But it is, it is struggle for every, not only for documentary, I think also for scripted stuff, to develop and to produce. It takes time, and it takes, you have to understand where the story will fit, and where do you get the funds from? Either, if it's more like a Netflix stuff, or BBC stuff, or Israeli TV stuff, or what. So you have to understand who's your audience, and then you know how to reach the funding.
I actually think that's all we have time for. Thank you, Duki, for your wonderful answers and for giving us your time. And thank you to everyone who joined the call and asked such amazing questions. Sorry if we didn't get round to asking your question, but thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you again. And I hope that everyone enjoyed this call. Please could you all like our Facebook page for more updates and register for our next Q&A with Lenny Abrahamson, who's the director of Normal People and Room, on the 2nd of June at 2 p.m. Thank you again, and thank you, Duki. Very,
Bye-bye.
very.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.